Imagine you're a detective assigned to a high-profile homicide case. You have two main suspects. One of them, she's captivating, strikingly beautiful with a flawless face that exudes elegance. Her eyes are deep and full of charm, her posture graceful, her voice soft yet commanding. Everyone around her is drawn to her. People can't help but admire her. She's the kind of woman who lights up a room just by walking in. And the other, well, not so much. Who would you be more inclined to suspect? Well, obviously, as a detective, you rely on the evidence to guide your decision. But what if I told you that beauty has already swayed your judgment before you even realize? Would you question the captivating suspect as harsh as you should? Would you see the signs of guilt, or would you dismiss them because, well, someone like her couldn't possibly be involved? After all, how could someone so elegant be capable of doing something so gruesome? This is the subtle power of beauty, and we're going to explore that through two of Keigo Higashino's work, The Salvation of a Saint and A Journey Under a Midnight Sun. Of course, there are going to be spoilers for the book. I tried to give as little spoilers as I could and keep it more relevant to the topic, but however, I do still suggest that you check out the book yourself before you watch the video. And something else is that my analysis of the book is based on the English translation, so if you read the Chinese or Japanese translation, it might be very different. First, let's talk about Keigo Higashino himself. Keigo Higashino is one of Japan's most celebrated mystery authors, known for his complex, intriguing plots and psychological depth. His writing often goes beyond the typical who's the killer, and instead dive into human nature, deception, and gray areas of morality. What sets him apart is his ability to build suspense not around the crime, but around the character themselves, how they think, how they're perceived, and how they manipulate those around them. Take for example in The Salvation of a Saint, the identity of the killer is revealed to us in the very first chapter. The real tension lies in trying to uncover the motive behind why the killer did what they did and how they did what they did. This approach of focusing on character psychology and trying to unravel the hidden facets of human behavior is central to many of Keigo Higashino's works. In both of these works, Higashino explores the idea that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a knife, it's a beautiful face. The Salvation of a Saint opens with the death of Yoshitaka Mashiba, poisoned in his own home. The prime suspect is his wife, Ayane Mashiba, but there is this one baffling question. How could she have poisoned him when she was miles away at the time of his death? This seemingly impossible crime becomes a challenge for Detective Kusanagi Nusumi alongside university physicist Manabu Yukawa as they work to uncover the truth behind a case where nothing is as straightforward as it seems. For the sake of the video, we're only going to be focusing on the dynamic between Kusanagi, the detective, and Ayane Mashiba, the housewife and main suspect. From the very beginning of the book, we can see that the second he lays his eyes on her, he's completely infatuated. It was as if his heart had suddenly leapt into his throat. He stared, unable to take his eyes off her, completely at a loss as to why the sight of Ayane Mashiba should affect him so strongly. Throughout their interactions, it is clear that Kusanagi treats Ayane differently from how he would treat any other suspect. Inwardly, he constantly sympathizes with her, unable to remain objective. When Ayane mentions that she hadn't expected a call from the police and how she received the news of her husband's death, Kusanagi feels an ache for her. Quote, Kusanagi felt a tightness in his chest as he imagined again the night she must have spent after hearing the news, and what it must have been for her boarding the plane that morning. When she breaks down in tears, his stomach knots, and he believes that she should be left alone, instead of questioning why is she purposely crying in front of all these detectives. His bias of her becomes so strong that he even defends her when another detective raises suspicions. As Utsumi, the other detective, puts it, he acts strangely when she's around her or talking about her. In the story, Ayane's physical beauty is not overtly emphasized, but the detective's infatuation with her plays a significant role in the story. While it is acknowledged that she is an attractive woman through Yukawa's objective observation, as he puts it, the focus is more on how her charm and grace clouds Kusanagi's judgment. Yukawa, who's not only the university professor but also a longtime friend of Kusanagi, sums this up perfectly in a small dialogue he has with Yutsumi. He recalls the story back in their college days where Kusanagi took in some stray kittens. The stray kittens were obviously weak and dying. However, Kusanagi would still every single day skip classes to feed and take care of those kittens. When another friend asked him why does he bother trying because they're clearly not gonna survive, Kusanagi's response was just two simple words. So what? Kusanagi's eyes when he looked at that woman were just like his eyes when he was taking care of those kittens. He knows something's not quite right, and at the same time, he's saying to himself, so what? This comparison portrays how Kusanagi's empathy for Ayane blinds him to the truth, mirroring the same emotional instinct he had for those kittens, an attachment despite knowing better. He was afraid that if they didn't find anything, they'd be forced to turn to Ayane Mashiba as the last suspect. He didn't care what the others thought. Kusanagi was worried about what would happen when he started suspecting her. His years of experience as a detective had shown him countless of people who had been driven to murder because of their circumstances, and deep down his instincts told him that Ayane was no different. Yet he still clung to his bias, deliberately chasing dead ends in an effort to silence his growing suspicions. He refused to explore the idea that Ayane might be the murderer, even if all evidence seems to be pointing to that possibility. It was only through behind-the-scenes work of Utsumi and Yukawa that the impossible crime was finally resolved and they found evidence that Ayane was guilty. As Yukawa puts it in the final chapter, with the unraveling of the perfect crime came the unraveling of Kusanagi's affection. His emotional attachment to Ayane had clouded his perception throughout the entire investigation, even if he doesn't want to admit it to himself. But as the truth inevitably unraveled, he was forced to shatter his perception of Ayane and put the handcuffs on her. The image of Ayane as an innocent, pitiful, grieving widow had to be finally shattered. His involvement, driven by a mix of empathy, attraction, and subconscious bias, illustrates the profound power that beauty or attraction has over human logic. He wasn't merely overlooking evidence, he was compelled to protect her, even when reason should have pointed him into the opposite direction. But how and why does this happen? Psychologist Nancy Eskoff, in her book The Survival of the Prettiest, discusses how beauty affects our perception and interactions. We expect attractive people to be better at everything, from piloting a plane to being good in bed. We assume their marriages are happier, their jobs are better, and that they are mentally healthier. This bias starts early in life. In one study, teachers in 400 different classrooms were given the objective of analyzing a student through their report card. They were given the identical report card, and the only difference was the child's photo. Attractive children were consistently expected to be more popular, sociable, and more smarter. These assumptions eventually lead to the more attractive children actually getting better grades, which further reinforces the assumption. Nancy Eckhoff also mentions another interesting study done by Karen Dion, a well-known researcher regarding attractiveness. She asked adults to evaluate hypothetical 7-year-olds who behave poorly, stepping on a dog's tail or being violent towards other children. Attractive children were more likely to be given the benefit of the doubt, with adults assuming that they just had a bad day or they were the victims themselves. Unattractive children, on the other hand, were viewed with suspicion, potentially as future delinquents. This phenomenon is known as the halo effect, a cognitive bias that leads us to associate positive traits with people simply because they are physically attractive. Because of this perception, because of this unconscious association, this actually ends up leading to better treatment in social, academic, and professional settings. This is why it might be difficult to believe that somebody beautiful can do something so heinous as murdering their husband, as in the case of Ayane Mashiba. Quote, good-looking adults are more likely to get away with anything from shoplifting to cheating on exams to committing serious crimes. Even if they are reported, they are less likely to face consequences. Law enforcement officials, juries, and judges don't just judge the current circumstances and the person's past behavior, but they take a look and think, could she or he have done that? Beauty, in essence, creates this kind of social armor that shields individuals from judgment or suspicions. In Ayane's case, her beauty didn't just mask her crime, but it actively worked in her favor, influencing Kusanagi to perceive her as a victim instead of a possible suspect. In his mind, suspecting Ayane could shatter the image he had constructed around her, an image that was primarily shaped by her beauty and his first impression of her. Once his attraction to Ayane had taken root, he would subconsciously seek out information that would prove that Ayane was innocent and disregard any other information that proves her guilt. In contrast, Yukawa and Utsumi approach the investigation with a much more detached and analytical mindset. Their ability to remain objective and focus more on evidence rather than emotional involvement is what led them to see beyond Ayane's appearance. Yukawa, in particular, is known for his skepticism and his refusal to accept surface-level explanations. He tends to question assumptions and dive deeper into the mechanics of how things work, which is how he ultimately found a way to prove that Ayane was guilty. When emotional bias is removed and we focus solely on reason and evidence, Ayane's wrongdoings become clear, illustrating that while beauty can manipulate perception, it cannot always forever obscure reality. Or can it? When a man is discovered murdered in an abandoned building in 1973, Detective Sasagaki is assigned to the investigation. He begins to unravel the ties between two young individuals deeply connected to the crime. The brooding, reserved son of the victim, Roji Kirihara, and the stunning, beautiful daughter of the primary suspect, Yukiho Karasawa. Over the next 2 decades, we track their life as Sasagaki relentlessly pursues the case, driven to the brink of obsession. However, this isn't your typical murder mystery novel. We never get to see the story unfold from one perspective. Different narrators are presented multiple times throughout the story, and even though the main character of the novels are Roji and Yukiho, we never get to see things from their perspective. However, one thing is certain, there is a narrative that is prevalent in every single one of these different narrators, and it's that Yukiho is stunningly beautiful. Throughout the novel, Yukiho is often described as a beauty, possessing features that perfectly align with traditional beauty standards in Japan. Her face exudes this elegant grace, and she is often noted for her slim, elegant figure. Her pale skin, a very prized beauty standard in most Asian cultures, is repeatedly mentioned and emphasized throughout the story. It's even in her name. In one instance, Eriko, Yukiho's friends, ask her if she plans on attending any school club activities. Yukiho declines and even lectures her friend that going outside and getting sunburns would only lead to more wrinkles as you age. Eriko, glancing at Yukiho's flawless skin, as white as the Yuki, meaning snow, in her name, silently agrees that her pale complexion is something worth preserving. This moment highlights how central Yukiho's beauty is, not only in how others perceive her, but in how she curates her life to be able to protect it. Her beauty is her greatest asset, and she is acutely aware of the power it holds. This illusion of innocence is exactly what helps her avoid suspicions. From childhood to middle school to high school, Yukiho's beauty consistently draws admiration from others around her, compelling them to treat her a specific special way. As she transitions into adulthood, this dynamic becomes even more pronounced. A recurrent theme throughout the book is how when characters feel a suspicion towards Yukiho, they will make an astute observation, sometimes even hitting the truth, but ultimately dismiss it because it's Yukiho. In one instance, Yukiho's suitor becomes suspicious of her behavior, and this is then confirmed when he spots her roaming the streets at midnight. When he questions her about it, she finally confides in him about her troubled past and the death of her mother. To give some context, Yukiho's real mother died a few years after the investigation, and she was promptly adopted by her cousin. In that moment, a horrible thought that had been lurking in the back of his mind began to surface. What if upon discovering her dying mother, Yukiho hadn't seen tragedy but opportunity? What if she had realized that with her mother gone, she could rely on her wealthy, elegant cousin Reiko Karasawa to take her in? But he quickly stops himself, feeling ashamed for quote entertaining such a twisted thought, as he tells himself she could have never done something so cold. Time and time again, different characters throughout the story experience this pattern over and over again, to the point where it grows frustrating. Her beauty didn't just attract admiration or attraction, but it held the power to distort people's ability to look at her objectively. In the case of his suitor, it's not just his suspicions that unsettle him, but instead the idea that somebody as beautiful, as elegant as Yukiho could be able to do something so dark. And this cycle would always end the very same way. The characters would in turn start doubting themselves instead of Yukiho, except for two individuals, Kazunari and the detective Sasagaki. Although these two characters come close to unraveling her secrets, they never really succeed by the end of the novel. Let's focus more on Kazunari. His suspicion of her begins early, from the very first moment they met. While others are mesmerized by Yukiho's delicate beauty, Kazunari notices something that everyone else seems to miss. Quote, thorns in her eyes, as he describes it. Despite her refined appearance, her eyes betray something darker, leading him to think, a true lady would never have eyes like that. This subtle but significant observation sets him apart from those who blindly admire her. When their paths cross again because Yukiho is trying to marry his cousin, this deepens his suspicions about her and actually propels him to take action, even going as far as to hiring a private detective to investigate about her. Yet, even Kazunari finds himself struggling against this powerful illusion of innocence and beauty that Yukiho projects. Towards the end of the book, there's two instances where he is left alone with Yukiho because he is helping her prepare the preparations for her stepmother's funeral. In this intimate moment, Yukiho cries in front of him. He instinctively places a hand on her shoulder as she's crying, to which Yukiho reciprocates. Quote, Kazunari felt a sudden, inexplicable rush of emotions, something that had been locked inside until now, unknown and inaccessible even to him. It grew, changed, becoming an impulse. His eyes went to the porcelain white skin at the nape of her neck. Just as he is overcome by this impulse, this moment is interrupted by a ringing phone call. Afterward, when he is left alone, he starts to doubt his initial doubts about Yukiho. Maybe that was the true Yukiho, and the one in his mind was just a warped image grown out of years of misunderstandings. Despite his earlier intuition, this illusion of innocence that Yukiho projects proves strong enough to make him second-guess himself, someone who had come so close to the truth. The novel subtly demonstrates how society equates beauty with purity, and how easily people are blinded by surface-level traits, even when faced with conflicting evidence. This phenomenon is a clear manifestation of the halo effect, which I mentioned earlier. In Yukiho's case, her beauty leads people to assume she's also kind, virtuous, and incapable of wrongdoing. This bias makes it significantly easier for them to dismiss their suspicions. For example, consider Kazunari's two most conflicting thoughts about Yukiho. I believe Yukiho is extraordinarily beautiful, embodying grace and elegance, which leads him to view her as a person of high morals. And the other belief there's something unsettling about her behavior that suggests she may not be as innocent as she seems. To resolve this dissonance, it is way much more easier to dismiss or rationalize it instead of go through the tedious process of trying to uncover the truth. He might convince himself that his initial impression of Yukiho might just be a projection of his own insecurities, or that any discomfort he felt was his mind playing tricks on him rather than a reflection of Yukiho's true character. Moreover, her beauty aligns with cultural standards that idealize purity, particularly in Japan and other Asian cultures. This cultural context reinforces the halo effect, amplifying the impact of Yukiho's beauty on those around her. She becomes not just an attractive woman, but the very embodiment of an idealized, untouchable purity, making it even harder for people to believe she could be capable of deceit or malice. This all finally brings us to our current theme in Higashina's work, the profound power of a beautiful face and that impact on perception. These two stories dive into how beauty and other superficial traits can distort our own perception of truth. In his story, characters whom are conventionally attractive, such as Ayane or Yukiho, can manipulate those around them even if they're not doing it consciously. In other words, it's just the lure, the attraction people have to a beautiful face inevitably creates this illusion of innocence. However, this isn't just unique to Keigo Higashino's world, but it's also very much prevalent in our real world. Celebrities commit literal crime. Sometimes they're just brushed off as scandal or tea simply because people really like them. Or one of the most unsettling is how some serial killers have fans simply because they're hot. In quotations. There's thousands of videos out there that dive into the real world stories, but in this very specific video, I decided to dive into Keigo Higashino's world. Beauty can easily captivate and deceive, and without knowing, we ourselves might have fallen into the trap as well. It is simple for us to judge those people who have fallen into Yukiho's trap, or to berate the detective for letting his attraction to Ayane affect his investigation. But one crucial question still remains for us, the readers, the viewers. Are we seeing the full truth? Or like Higashino's characters, are we letting beauty sway our perception of reality?